Good morning. I am Kevin Price. Delighted to be with you. Going to spend some time with you talking to you about you and your business. We're going to talk this segment with the author of the book, Rational Polemics. Oh, man, when's the last time you had a serious conversation about polemics? We're going to have a conversation about rational polemics on this segment today with Richard Todd Devens, tackling the ethical dilemmas of life. Rational Polemics, according to the reviews, is a provocative, controversial, outrageous book that dares to challenge the ideas and values that most of the world has been spoon-fed from infancy onward. With personal anecdotes, tongue-in-cheek humor, and refreshing candor, author Richard Devens thinks outside the traditional structure of convention and morality and asks important questions, including, does poetic justice exist? Is forgiveness always the best method to achieve closure? Do we have the right to end our own lives? Should drugs be legal? And much, much more. We're going to jump right straight into all of these controversies. Be lucky to scratch more than one or two of them, which is why you need to read the book, Rational Polemics, by Richard Todd Devens. Richard Todd, we're glad to have you. Is it Richard or Todd? What do you prefer?
Well, Todd is my middle name, and Richard is my first name, so most people just call me Richard.
Glad to have you on, Richard. Tell us a little bit about your background and what compels you to write this book.
Well, I'm a professional pianist. I was classically trained, and I teach and play for parties and receptions and black tie affairs. But the genesis of this book came about because I've been thinking about all the things that I've written about for many years. And one day I just said to myself, I have to get all of this down in print. And so I finally did. A lot of people might say, well, what does a pianist know about all these things? Well, I think and I read, and I don't have to necessarily have been a philosophy or psychology major to have written a book.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to have that. And, one of my favorite books is The True Book. Oh, my goodness, what is his name? Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Was written by a guy with a high school education who became one of the greatest social philosophers, I think, of the 20th century. And so you're certainly right. People's ability to bring observation isn't predicated on their background or their training, just the ability to observe. And someone with your background, obviously, you have to bring great skill, really a focus on detail in order to be able to do what you do very well. And so I'm sure that all contributes as well.
Yes, absolutely. Piano playing requires a lot of practice, a lot of thinking, a lot of detail, and I think that I put the same kind of care into what I wrote about.
Very good. Tell me about what was your motivation? So all these thoughts are going through your head, and a lot of people have these kind of thoughts. They're not beyond the realm of people's imaginations. What compels you that you needed to write about it?
Well, I found that people just say things. When people say things over and over again, it kind of becomes true. Like, for example, just a cliche. I could care less is really I couldn't care less, but because it said I could care less so many times, it's become the accepted way to say it. So people say things so many times. For instance, when you're talking about a higher form of life, I've been criticized a lot because I don't consider all people to be a higher form of life than insects. And but nobody can really prove why a human being, just because he has a more complex brain structure and anatomy, is a higher form of life than an insect. Because think of very evil people like Saddam Hussein or Hitler, Stalin, Osama bin Laden. I think doing away with people like that is totally morally justifiable. And, an insect or, a small animal may not be complex and may not be advanced, but they don't harm anyone. So, I just bring up, topics such as this.
Right. And that's interesting. And so do you have these conversations because you sincerely advocate them or believe them, or simply because you want to challenge conventional wisdom? Because I think we live in a culture of sheeple, people who have a sheep mentality. And we hear this conventional wisdom, and we all, become true believers of what we're taught and what we've seen. So what's your primary objective in doing this? Are you an advocate for insects?
I totally believe in what I wrote, but sometimes there are no right answers to a question, but sometimes just asking the right questions and propelling thought about these things is good enough. But I totally believe in what I wrote.
Okay, interesting. It's interesting. And what are some other controversial things that you cover in your book?
Well, I talk about the death penalty. I talk about obscenity. For example, a man can walk through Central Park who has gynecomastia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's man boobs. And a woman cannot walk topless through Central Park, even if she's flat-chested. She can get arrested. So, I just bring up things like that, which people don't normally think about.
Hold on, wait a minute. I'm going to have to ask you to run through that one more time.
Well, I was saying that man
Go ahead.
Topless through Central Park who has man boobs, and a woman who's flat-chested cannot walk topless through Central Park. So what is the issue? Is the issue one of breasts or how we think of women, for example?
That's interesting. Interesting. So there's very few things that are sacred in this thing, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you just want to tackle it. So what do you hope to garner as far from the reader? What do you want the reader to walk away with?
I want the reader to say, hey, I never thought of this that way. Maybe I don't agree with it, but he has a point. Or maybe something that I've written is conceived by another person as outrageous, but then when they reduce it down to its basic logic, hey, maybe this guy has a point. I never thought of it that way,
Yeah. And although I know I have my own rationalizations and see why, as a culture, we would have the laws that we have, regarding running around topless. And I have very specific views that differ from you on our view of insects. What I like fundamentally about the book and the concept about the book is challenging all these presuppositions and all of these ideas that we're taught as if they're almost sacred. And so I love that idea. I think it's very important to challenge what we've been taught. That's the cornerstone of critical thinking. So I love the idea. I think it's great. How do we get more information about your book?
Well, if you go online, there's a lot of reviews on Amazon, or if somebody just writes to the publisher, Outskirts Press, I'm happy to respond to anybody who writes. They will transfer any emails to me, and I'd be more than happy to get in touch with anybody who wants to speak with me regarding the book.
Richard Todd Devens, he's been our guest. He's the author of the book Rational Polemics. If you go to outskirtspress.com/Rational Polemics, you will go to his page where you can immediately look at the book, read a great little summary of the book, and you have options including ebooks for purchasing that book. And I encourage people to check it out. Outskirts, that's plural, outskirtspress.com/Rational Polemics. Hey, I appreciate you being with us today, Richard. Great interview.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
You bet. When we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you, best content here, it shows up over there at usdatareview.com. While they're like it on Facebook, follow on Twitter, and this is the price of business.